Here's the first in a series of fixing mistakes. Now, this is a project that I'm currently working on. This is the Row Cardigan. It's a knit along for my local yarn store. And of course, I broke the rules. Everybody else is starting on the fronts, and I decided to start on the back because that's the way that the pattern is actually written. And it's kind of a good thing that I did because I'm using all of the charts on the back piece, whereas on the front you're only using one of the charts. And I found a mistake in the chart. It took a couple of rows for me to realize that there was a mistake. So now I have this incongruous thing in my cables that I need to fix. So you can actually see quite well what I'm talking about here. There's these two stitches right here that kind of stand out from the fabric. There's one here and there's one over here. And what it is that the cables that were charted, and I did actually knit this the way that it is charted, are a cross where you purl two of the stitches. But those stitches didn't need to be purled, they actually needed to be knit. So these two cables should have been standard 2x2 crosses. So the question is, how do you fix this? Most people would leave it there because they're thinking that they got to tink 6 rows and there's cables in there, and that is just going to be a major hassle. And you'd be absolutely right. If I were going to tink this, this would be a lesson in patience. But for those of you who know me well, you know that I really don't tink unless it's just a handful of stitches, and I don't frog either. I do what's known as fixing it on the needles. So in order to do this, you want to set yourself up first. I'm getting ready to start a right side row, and I'm going to work in pattern to this first stitch in question and then fix those two, and then I'll work in pattern to the next 2 stitches and I'll fix those 2. Now if there's a cable here in the next row, I may end up slipping a few stitches without working them just so that I can get to these to fix these before I cable above them. Once you've cabled above them, you run into the situation of having to drop down an entire cable and then fix that cable, and that gets a little tricky. It's not impossible, but it's tricky. So the first thing you want to do is give yourself a visual clue. Alright, so take a removable stitch marker and mark the first stitch. And the reason why I say use a removable stitch marker is we're not going to stick this in the knitting, we're going to put it on the cable so that when we come to this stitch marker we know that this is where we need to stop. And then if we have a cable very close to it, we can make the determination on whether or not we want to do that cable and then fix, or do we want to slip those stitches and then fix the issue and then slide those stitches back. And we'll have to see because I haven't looked at the next row in the pattern yet. So when you get in here and you're looking a little close, it's tricky with cables because your stitches are constantly being pushed one way or the other. And in this case, it's only 2 stitches. And you can use the top one here as your guide. So these knit stitches here are what are above that stitch. So I'm going to stick this right here. And it's just a visual cue. Alright? So that's what stitch markers are. They tell you when something's happening. So this, because this is not like any of the other stitch markers that I have used, is just kind of a friendly reminder that I need to fix something here. And I'm going to go ahead and put one down on the other one as well. That way I don't have to stop and do it later. Now these stitch markers are actually going to come in handy to help us fix this as well. Not just as a visual cue, but as a stopper. And you'll see what I mean when I get to actually fixing this. So again, I'm just going to find that purl stitch that's out of place, and I'm going to follow the line up and put a stitch marker on the cable between these 2 stitches that really want to be snug to each other. So there we go. I have my 2 stitch markers in place. I'm going to go ahead and work this pattern from the beginning all the way to that first stitch marker. And we'll come back and I'll show you what happens next. Alright, so here we are. I am 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches from my stitch marker. However, my next operation is a 6-stitch cable, which means I'd be crossing that stitch marker. So all I need to do is just take these 4 stitches and slip them to my working needle. So no yarn, just a slip. And always slip purlwise because it makes it easier to put them back. Okay. Once you've done this and you're right at your stitch marker, obviously you can take the stitch marker off, but don't send it too far away. Just hold on to that because you're going to need that. Alright. What you want to do next is protect your stitches. While you're manipulating the fabric, you don't want to lose the stitches on your working needle. So, in order to avoid that, there's a couple of things that you can do. Obviously, if you have point protectors, just pop one of those on there and call it good. But if you don't have point protectors, like me, I'm sure I have some somewhere, but don't ask me where, I don't use them. All you need to do is just pull that needle out. If you're on a circular needle, obviously you can just set all of your stitches down on your cable. If you're on straight needles, just slide your stitches down towards the ball on the end of your needle. Just get them away from the tip of your needle. Because what we're going to deal with next are these next 2 stitches. Now, there's 2 ways that you can do this. If you're savvy and you've done it before, you can use your crochet hook or latch hook if that's what you're more comfortable with. And simply follow the line down. You might have to squish some stitches out of the way to figure out who's who. And find the final purl. Okay, get your hook in there. And then you can pop that stitch off. And here's where it gets a little scary. Alright, because now we're going to pull the fabric. And we're going to pull it all the way down. And look at, one thing that I always find interesting is just how big these ladders are. It really gives you a sense of how much yarn you are using in an individual stitch. I've got a bit of an artifact and a bit of a wrap in there, so we want to make sure that we break that and get it out. Just going to go all the way down. And I'm knitting in wool, so of course sometimes wool really likes itself. That's okay. Alright, we've got 1 more stitch. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. So we got to get this stitch out of here, but that yarn needs to go to the back. So this is where that stitch marker that I told you to hold on to comes in very, very handy. Can I break that? There we go. So take that stitch marker, put it in the stitch on your hook. Get in that loop, all right, so that you can take the hook out and then find that final stitch that's in there. Use your hook for this. This yarn right here, possibly, maybe, I may actually have it snagged in the stitch marker. All right, we're getting crazy. Take the stitch marker out. And take that yarn out. Wow, is that ugly. Okay, so this is the stitch that we need right here. This yarn right here is the very first one that we need, so we need it to go back behind. When you're fixing a stitch like this and you're doing it on the needle, as it were, always make sure that you're working from the knit side. Now, when I say that, I do not necessarily mean that you are working from the right side, because in a case of cables or ribbing, your knits can be on the right or the wrong side. So if I needed these stitches to be purled all the way up to the top, I would flip this over and work it from the wrong side. But I need them to be knit, so I'm going to do it from here. So you find the next one, the next ladder in the group, and you pull that through. And then you grab the next one, and you pull that through. All the way back up to the top. Now, you may notice I'm using a rather small crochet hook for this. It happened to be the one that was sitting next to me, yes. However, when you are doing this, it is very, very easy to pull tension from the stitches that surround the one that you're working with. So in order to avoid making big gaps that you're going to have to play with later, use a smaller hook. At the very least, you want to use a hook that's the same size as what you are knitting with. And they're all done in millimeters and then a standard size. So match the millimeters. If you can't find one that's the same size, go smaller, don't go bigger. Alright, now I'm going to get this back up onto my working needle, and then we're going to take care of the next one. And I don't really care if it's forwards or backwards, because I'll deal with that when I come back to it. Now this next one, because it's right at the cross of the cable, is a bit trickier to find the bottom stitch, the lowest one that we want to go. And if you don't go all the way down, the beauty of cables is right in the cross, they kind of get a little hazy on what's going on. So go where you feel the most comfortable. And I'm going to take the stitch marker and pick up that loop and put the stitch marker in it this time instead of the crochet hook. So this is the other way that you can do it. Now I'm not going to lock mine, but if you feel more secure with yours locked, then lock it. If you have the little plastic round ones that just slide in, just take them as far as they will go away from the opening. So then we'll drop that one off, and hopefully this one's not going to be quite as artifacty. And it is. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Alright, so we've got one more that we need to pull out because the loop that we're in is the one that we actually need. Use the crochet hook to snag the yarn and pull that one out. Alright, so now here's that tricky bit where we're going to take this out. Oh, come on. I've got stitches stuck together left and right. Alright. So my stitch is here, nestled down in between these two strands. So all I'm going to do is just hold that. And I'm going to use my crochet hook to kind of break that little bit of junk, as it were, that gets caught up in the stitches when you're trying to do this. Alright, so I'm going to go under this big loop and grab the stitch and pull it back to this side, because we need knit stitches, and when you knit, your purl bump goes to the back and your yarn is always on the back. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the previous stitch. Pick up the first ladder, pull it through. Pick up that ladder, pull it through. And do that all the way up. Now the first ones are tricky because they're a little closer together when they're part of a cable, or very near a cable, but as you go up it becomes much, much easier to figure out who's who. Okay, so I got that one up. Now we're going to pop that one back on either needle at this point, because we're going to move all the stitches anyways, because I need those stitches to be worked. Now, I want to show you. So I just fixed this stitch and that stitch, and what you get is this little separation in between. And the reason why we get that is I'm right-handed, which means that I'm pulling the stitches towards the right as I do this. Now normally when I do this off camera, I've got it in my lap and I'm way down here, and it's easier to pull things straight. But if you get that, don't stress over it. Yours may even be bigger. What that is as you're pulling a little bit of slack out of the stitches in the next row. That will block out. Okay, it'll completely go away when you block your piece. Now you can also just give the stitches a little tug, and that will help kind of bring them back into line. So there you go, how to fix a couple of mispatterned stitches. Now I'm just going to move these guys back until I find my yarn, and one more stitch there, and then I can work my 6-stitch cable. And no one will ever know that there was a mistake there.